Let's take a close look at the BBC. Never before has the beleaguered corporation been under such heavy fire as the huge publicly funded broadcaster battles to retain its £157.50 a year TV license fee, which brings in a staggering 3.5 billion a year, and the howling criticism of its alleged metropolitan left-wing bias and obsessive wokeism gets louder by the day. The Beeb faces an uncertain future. That this lumbering leviathan of an organisation needs reforming, no one disputes. That it must rise to the challenge of streaming giants like Netflix, Amazon Prime and Disney Plus is undeniable. But after the appointment of yet another white male middle-aged, middle-class, public school-educated Oxbridge graduate as the next Director General, you have to wonder whether the BBC is genuinely trying to forge a fresh path. Is it, in fact, digging its heels in and refusing to change? Let's ask a man who knows the Beeb inside out, now an author, broadcaster and master of Cambridge University's Selwyn College. During his high-flying career at the BBC, Roger Mosey rose to the top of the pile as Director of News, and he joins us now. Hello, Roger. I don't know why I got this into my head. I thought you were a Fulham fan, but it turns out you're an Arsenal fan. So the interview is cancelled.
Right, okay. No, I have a lot of affection for Fulham, apart from the statues outside the ground, but it's great club.
It's George Cohen now, no longer Michael Jackson, you'll be happy to hear. But our fortunes do not improve. Anyway, look, I want to talk to you about the BBC at the crossroads and how it ploughs its furrow into an uncertain future, a topic you covered in a fascinating article for the Royal Television Society. But two things happened this week that arguably shine a light into the root of one of the BBC's major problems: the perception that it is politically biased and out of touch with people who are neither left-leaning liberals nor part of the metropolitan elite. The first was the axing of the Andrew Neil show. Mr. Neil is undoubtedly by some way the Beeb's best political interviewer, forensic, brilliantly well-informed and a figure of terror to all MPs, which is how it should be. He's also chairman of the right-wing Spectator magazine, so in BBC parlance, not one of us. Okay, he's not in the first flush of youth, but his show isn't being axed because of his age. It seems certain it's because Andrew Neil does not adhere to BBC Liberal London groupthink. This is a massive mistake that sends the wrong message, don't you think?
Well, there's a financial crisis in the BBC, so they have to, at the moment, axe a lot of programmes. I think, in fairness, Andrew Neil was the most prominent interviewer during the election campaign as recently as December. But I certainly agree that Andrew Neil has been a really important part of the BBC mix, and he is a strong counterweight to the argument that the BBC is too much run by liberals.
Talking of which, the second significant event of this week was the appearance by the Beeb's Director of Editorial Policy and Standards, David Jordan, before the House of Lords Communications and Digital Committee, in which he admitted that egregious, that was his term, not mine, violations of the corporation's social media guidelines have undermined its reputation for impartiality and objectivity. In other words, biased BBC hacks are tweeting out their prejudices with monotonous regularity on a 24/7 basis. Mr. Jordan says that the Beeb's addiction, once again his term, to Twitter is toxic. Add that to Emily Maitlis's extraordinary attack on Dominic Cummings on Newsnight, in which she didn't even bother to pretend to be impartial. And you've got a big problem here, haven't you?
Well, full marks to David Jordan for highlighting the problem. I do think Twitter is a major barrier to impartiality in the BBC, and I would take a pretty hard line on it. I think if you work for the BBC, I would say you shouldn't tweet on anything political or your personal views. And I think it's really unfortunate that Twitter has, started as a way of engaging with your audience. The trouble is it's very hard not to tell where you're coming from politically. And I do think, I love the BBC, and I think it's worth fighting for, but there is no doubt that the BBC is at times over-dominated by metropolitan Remain voters, and I know I was one of them, and it does need to reflect the whole of the country.
Don't tell me, Roger, so was I, but I didn't like the idea of trying to overturn a democratic decision, so I think we should have got on with getting out once that decision was made. But yes, there is a bias towards Remainer, left-wing, or not necessarily left-wing, but left-leaning liberal politics at the BBC, and I think it's becoming a massive problem.
Yeah, well, I am a believer in impartiality and being completely fair to everybody. And I think if you are a national broadcaster, the problem is you can't start telling off some people because they have views you don't like, because they are paying for you. So in a way, it doesn't matter if the Guardian goes into a narrower position, or the New York Times, or on the other side the Daily Telegraph or the Daily Mail. That doesn't matter at all because you choose to pay for those. The problem with the BBC is that everybody in the country is expected to pay for it, and they are entitled for their views to be taken seriously and not chastised by a bunch of people in Broadcasting House. So on that, I would certainly agree with you.
Now, the appointment of BBC lifer Tim Davie, white, male, middle class, public school educated, Oxbridge graduate. What a shock. Hardly indicates a different road ahead, does it? The BBC needs a revolutionary Director General, not a continuity candidate. Would you agree with that? And what the hell is going on here?
I'm going to pick you up. I mean, Tim Davie was the first in his family to go to a university, and there's nothing wrong with going to Oxford or Cambridge. I say that.
I think I might have been the first in my family as well. But
well,
yeah.
No, I was as well. I was as well. But I think Tim Davie has got to be a revolutionary, and you're right that his background is very conventional. And the other thing, of course, he's been a BBC senior executive for 15 years. He's been there through the last 15 years. But the fact that government is as hostile as it is, the fact that younger audiences are dwindling, the financial crisis facing the BBC, Tim has to be a revolutionary. And if you just go with steady as you go, that is not going to work. The BBC needs to change.
Yeah, in fairness to Tony Hall, that was his job, was to steady the ship after the debacle of Jimmy Savile. George Entwistle, his predecessor, had to resign after about 10 minutes because of that. So I think in that respect, Tony Hall's done a decent job. I don't think he's been particularly effective apart from that. I think that the other problems that Bieber's got now, scrapping free licenses for the over 75s, a really bad look. And the fact that it seems to still continue to voraciously pursue license fee, I was going to call them dodgers, but people who don't pay the license fee. There is this extraordinary statistic that 1 in 10 court cases in Britain is the BBC suing people for not paying their license. That has to stop, and it has to be decriminalised. Don't you agree?
The BBC disputes that figure of 1 in 10, but look, I don't think you would ever start from the principle that you should send people to prison potentially for not paying a TV licence. I mean, the argument is a complex one. The argument is that if you decriminalise, you essentially mean that the BBC has an even bigger financial gap. And the other argument is that the fines you impose, if it's not criminal, have to be bigger rather than smaller. So there's a balance of arguments here. And I as I say, I think the BBC is worth fighting for. I don't like the fact that the government is using decriminalisation potentially as a weapon to defund the BBC, because what we should do is look at what is the right shape for the BBC in future. What's the right amount of money to pay for things you really need? And during the coronavirus crisis, you saw that at times the BBC is a place everyone goes for news and information.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Does that mean it needs to have as many channels as it has or as much output as it has? Not necessarily, but you do need something there, which is the national platform that people can come to.
Do you think that it endears the BBC to its core audience, Middle England people who love the Beeb, when Tony Hall announces that the most important thing at the BBC is diversity, and he's going to spend £100 million on a big diversity initiative? Do you think the average BBC viewer, customer, gives a damn about that sort of woke nonsense?
Well, the BBC needed to have a more diverse workforce. It was
£100 million quid, Roger.
I mean, you can't on one hand you can't say it's terrible there's another white middle class DG and then say diversity is a bad thing. But I think
that isn't very diverse, is it? To appoint a white middle class Oxbridge graduate.
I think what diversity means to me is it does mean better representation of ethnic minorities, but it also means better representation of white working class voters in Don Valley. And the metropolitanness of the BBC, sometimes if the organisation had been based in Bradford, my hometown, it would probably have taken a different view of many of the big issues of recent years to it being based in London. So I don't think it's necessarily wrong to think we want a wider range of voices. You just got to make sure they really are a wider range of voices. You're not going for a liberal groupthink.
Would you agree that the BBC is going to have to confront and face up to the reality that whatever happens to the license fee, it's going to get reduced. And if they dig their heels in and say, we want that £157.50 from every single viewer, they're going to face defeat on that. They're going to have to compromise on their love of the license fee, aren't they?
Yeah, and if Tim Davie is going to be really radical, and I have no idea whether he'll do this, there is a way of saying, let's look at a smaller license fee that pays for the real core of the BBC, the stuff that everybody wants and uses, and then the other part of the BBC could be by some kind of subscription. So you could say, you know what, you get the proms, you get the first night of proms and the last night of proms free on BBC One. If you want the 20 proms, 50 proms in between, you pay a season ticket for those through the iPlayer, and you get something extra. So I think there are ways you could be radical with the funding, and certainly for younger audiences who are watching very little of the BBC in normal times, the idea you've got to pay £157.50 for something you don't use very much is not going to be a long-term prescription.
I'll tell you what, though, Roger, it's going to be interesting times ahead. Tim Davie has got one hell of a job. I wish you were still there. Thanks so much for your time. Good luck to Arsenal. I don't mean that. I'm sorry you don't support Fulham, but it was great talking to you. Thanks very much, Roger. That was former BBC Director of News, Roger Mosey. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, and you're tuned to the impressively unbiased Talk Radio.